Muere Amor. The sunlight dripped through the window in the early morning, landing right on Simon's eyes. He shifted a bit before batting his eyelids open. Simon then stretched and his arms instinctively tightened around something that was laying over top of him. Someone. Simon smiled as he wrapped his arm around Stella's still sleeping body. She was, admittedly, an absolute mess while sleeping. Hair tangled in endless curls, drool staining Simon's sleep shirt, and a snore that was a tiny bit too loud to ignore. Beautiful, isn't she? He thought to himself. Simon slowly shimmied himself out of bed, being sure not to disturb Stella. He had big plans for today, and he couldn't just ruin the surprise. He gently covered Stella back up with her bed's blanket, quietly stepping out of her room. It had been 7 months since they had started dating, and it was a joyous experience the entire time thus far. Simon began sleeping in her bed only semi-recently, though. He was always too nervous to seize the opportunity and ask himself, so he stuck to sleeping on the sofa for a couple months. Although one night, when Stella invited him back to bed, he took it immediately. Simon almost regretted not asking sooner. Having someone to hold while sleeping made the nights a bit easier to withstand. He sifted through his clothes and picked out an outfit for today, topping it off with his sailor's cap. It was old, but still nice. It made Simon nostalgic. He glanced at himself in the mirror for a moment. He stepped in different ways to get better looks at himself. Rather refined today. Simon picked at the hairs on his chin, considering a small groom just to tidy things up. But, of course, Stella didn't have any nippers. He swept his hands over his outfit to smooth it out once before leaving the bedroom. Simon had a pep in his step, walking over to the kitchen. Was Stella still asleep? Right now was the perfect opportunity to make her a surprise breakfast. Simon flicked on the stove and began to fry up some bacon and eggs for the both of them. He made sure to cook them perfectly, all crispy and golden brown with that lovely crunch. Simon even got fancy with the plating, making a little smiley face using the eggs for eyes and bacon for a smile. He made sure everything was perfect, specifically adjusted and paragoned. Just as Simon was setting down the plates on the dining table, Stella emerged from her room. She had bags under her eyes, and for once, a face that just looked dead tired. Stella groaned loudly, stretching her arms and walking over to the living room. When she glanced over at Simon, her eyes immediately lit up on her dim face. "Hi," she sleepily drawled as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "What did you make? Smells great." "Eggs and bacon," Simon replied as he placed his hands on Stella's hips. "Oh, sounds lovely." She sat down with a weary smile on her face. Simon gave her a kiss on the forehead before sitting himself down. They both looked into each other's eyes, taking in their appearances. Simon thought that Stella looked absolutely haggard, honestly, but despite that, he actually found that kind of adorable. Her hair was an absolute tangled mess, and her skin looked really oily, and yet Simon loved every inch of her. Stella, on the other hand, was observing Simon. She noted he looked awfully neat today, more neat than usual. Stella almost felt insecure in the fact that she didn't look her best, when Simon obviously went out of his way to look nice. She twirled one of her coils around her fingers as she enjoyed the food in front of her. It really did taste good. Simon was an excellent home cook. "Do you like it, dear?" he asked her. Stella tried to say, not realizing a piece of egg was still in her mouth. "Excuse me, yes, I really do like it." Simon smiled at her. "I'm glad." Stella giggled, pursing her lips and wiping them with a napkin. She had noticed that Simon's sentences flowed much more smoothly than when they first met. He was still very awkward, but he smiled a lot more. He laughed a lot more. Stella was grateful that she had seen him on that first day, and Simon felt likewise. "I'm going to freshen up," Stella said as she stood up. "Do you need me to do the dishes?" "Oh, do not fret, my darling. I'll have them done." Simon stood up to make eye contact with her. Thank you, Kuipo. Any time, mon petit chauffeur. The pet names were relatively new as well. Simon started calling Stella common French terms of endearment first, although she didn't know what they meant. Stella then started with her native term, Kuipo. They were both unaware that they were basically calling each other sweetheart. Stella giggled as she walked off into the hallway. Simon took the dishes to the sink and washed them absent-mindedly, thinking about his plans for today. I can't wait until she sees it. I am so excited, he smiled to himself. I should get started on some snacks. Then we can go for a walk. Simon gently put the clean dishes on the drying rack and spun around to open the fridge. He pulled out some meat, cheese, and some other sandwich stuff. He prepared them with as much precision as he did with the breakfast, making sure everything was just right. He pulled out that lovely picnic basket that Stella had and began stuffing all sorts of things in it. The freshly made sandwiches, a couple apples, and anything that was just as sweet as his Stella. Then Simon glanced around, making sure that she wasn't in the room. He walked over to one of the side tables next to the sofa, pulling open a drawer. Inside was a very little box with a felt coating. He snapped it open, making sure what was meant to be inside was still there. A beautiful diamond ring sparkled and reflected in Simon's eyes. He smiled to himself as he gazed at it. Simon made sure to get the clearest, most glittering diamond in the shop, and he didn't regret laying down a good amount of cash for it. He was hell-bent on purchasing one that he thought to represent Stella's ethereal beauty. He even paid extra for an engraving that read, "My soul full of stars." Simon's heart jittered as he shut the box with a click, excited for his upcoming plans. He chuckled to himself as he remembered how funny it was to hide such an important thing in such a plain place. But in actuality, Stella never even used that side table aside from placing various items on the top. She never could have suspected something so germane could have been inside. He swept back over to the picnic basket, holding the ring box carefully in his hands. Simon rustled around the food and gently placed the box underneath so it would be perfectly concealed. He closed the flaps of the basket, not before wedging a bottle of champagne that he thought to buy the day before in there. Simon thought that having something to celebrate with would be another pleasant surprise over top of the already exciting event. He held the basket in his hand and stood patiently for Stella to return. In about 10 minutes, she did. Stella made an appearance in the hallway, wearing a beautiful flowing off-white dress. Her hair was now neat and styled, and was she wearing makeup? Simon looked up at her with a goofy grin, absolutely loving this look of hers. Stella glanced down at the picnic basket, smirking. Big plans today, Mr. Miner? She casually said as she approached. I was just thinking, he flushed. Would you like to go on a promenade with me? Promenade, huh? Stella wrapped her arms around Simon's neck. That would be great if I knew what promenade meant. It's a walk, darling, he laughed. Sounds nice. Stella turned her face into Simon's cheek and began to kiss his bright red face. He just stood there, grinning and taking it all in. He never really knew how to respond to affection, but Stella knew that he loved every bit of it. She pulled back and looked at him in the eyes with a soft expression. Where are we going today? Another beach trip? No, actually, Simon explained. How would you feel about a waltz in the woods? You sure you know your way around there? I may have skimmed over a few maps. It's actually a very popular spot. How exactly long were you planning this? Stella said with a playfully skeptical look. Longer than you know, he beamed. Stella leaned on him, drawing circles along his back with her finger. Sounds absolutely lovely, then. Simon gently swept his fingers under Stella's chin and tilted her head up, leaning in for a kiss. He glided his other hand across Stella's back, holding her softly as he deepened the kiss. She hummed, closing her eyes as she leaned into it. Simon let his lips off with a small pop, looking down at her. Are you ready to go, then? She happily buzzed. Simon held the picnic basket with one hand and Stella with the other. It was exciting. This was the first time Simon would be the leader to one of their many date locations. It was hard to hold back his giddy laughter as he knew what would be in store for them in just a bit. A couple months of planning leading up to this moment, and Simon was ecstatic. He took a deep breath before entering the woods with Stella. He envisioned the paths that he had memorized from studying the maps he looked into. Simon strutted along the trail with Stella by his side, trying to act completely normal and calm with the engagement ring in the basket. The 10 o'clock sun shone directly above them, making Simon's glasses glare. He didn't want to complain out loud, but it was very annoying. Simon rubbed his eyes. He thought he saw... No, it's just a trick of the light, silly. Is something wrong? Stella asked. They stood in place for a moment. Everything's fine, my dear. Just a bit excited is all. He put on a confident facade as he held Stella's hand through the woods. Simon slowly calmed his uneven breath. He continued to walk with his beloved, the nerves placated, for now. After a few minutes, Simon felt foolish for even being scared in the first place. He said it himself. This place was a popular spot to stroll during the day. Of course there were going to be other people than him. Stella rubbed her thumb over his hand as they walked. Simon smiled at her, appreciating the small gesture of comfort. Further down into the forest, thick branches wove into hands that covered the sun. Dappled lighting rained down on them. It made it seem like it was much later in the day than it really was. Simon looked up through the leaves, the sun streaming into pinpoints across his eyes. It was really beautiful. The woods back home consisted of willow trees, which often gave the same dapple effect. It reminded him of his childhood, the stories his papa used to tell him to keep him from straying in the woods at night. Simon pictured the folklore vividly, as if it was hiding in the thicket, waiting for him. He stopped suddenly, feeling dark eyes on the back of his neck. Simon? He looked around just to make sure it wasn't there. Simon? He suddenly snapped back to his senses. Oh, sorry, my love. I'm just a tad bit distracted. Tad? She suspiciously looked at him. Well, I suppose a lot, but... He sighed. It's all right. Let's just keep going. Stella continued to glance at Simon as they walked. He tried to convince himself that all the worry was from his planned proposal. Simon was overly anxious, eager to sit down, but they couldn't just stop in the middle of the path. He shook his head and exhaled out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So, he sighed. Have you ever walked in these woods, Stella? Stella, a bit surprised Simon began talking, responded. Ah, yes, quite a few times. Sometimes I even set up an easel and paint what I see. It's rather calming. Perhaps I'll have to join you in one of those sessions. She laughed. What will you do? I'm a good model, aren't I? He smiled, pleasantly distracted from his thoughts. You can paint me. She lightly punched his arm. I can just paint you at home, silly. He darted his eyes away and blushed. Simon absolutely melted at that, and this wasn't the first time. He looked off into the foliage for a second, gazing at all the pretty colors filling his vision. Oh, hold on a moment, Simon excitedly said before letting go of Stella. She stood there in the middle of the path as Simon went off the trail. He plucked a flower from a bush, a really big pink-yellow one with petals that burst from the center. He carefully stepped back to where she was standing and offered it to her. For you, ma petite chauffeur, he announced while bending slightly for a bow. Stella giggled, taking it. How chivalrous of you. I always enjoy a good hibiscus. They're pretty, aren't they? Simon nodded with her. Just as pretty as you, my dear. Stella stopped for a moment, taking her time to register that compliment. She blushed, grabbing hold of Simon's arm. You know, she said, hibiscuses have a special meaning in Hawaii. What is it? They represent delicate beauty and joyfulness. So you are just like it, then. Stella blushed even harder, caught off guard by the double compliment. Simon turned towards her, grabbing hold of the flower again, and gently tucking it behind Stella's ear. She was completely awestruck by him, just absolutely amazed at the amount of affection she was receiving. "I love you, my darling." Simon twiddled her precious hair between his fingers. He thought that Stella's cheeks had some competition with tomatoes for a moment, given how red they were turning. They continued to walk, giggling and chatting the entire time. Simon had almost forgotten about the peering eyes digging into his head, until he suddenly felt them again. He inhaled sharply, startling his date. "Simon?" Stella questioned with interjection. It's nothing, He began stuttering, something he thought he had long gotten over. Shockingly, Stella threw down his hand away from hers. "Simon, what's wrong with you?" He stared at her, stunned at the sudden outburst. The word stung. I... He tried, but failed to squeak out at least one tangible syllable. Stella shook her head, considering her words carefully. "This, and the night terrors, and..." she whispered, stopping before she said anything too harsh. Stella regretted it, seeing the instant look of hurt on Simon's face. She knew it wasn't his fault for being like that, but if only Simon knew how much sleep she sacrificed on the daily. "I'm sorry," Stella sighed. She gripped his hand again, tighter, as a sort of apology. "Let's just keep going." Simon could only nod, his face burning with a weird mix of humiliation and anxiety. The creeping feeling only worsened, but Simon tried his best not to express it. He thought it was taking too long to get to a clearing at this point. Beforehand, Simon had this whole area planned out with grass and flowers, but he just wanted to rest. He needed a shortcut before his impulsive side decided to turn back altogether. "Stella?" Simon piped up. "Yes?" "Have you ever been off the path before?" "Oh, yes, of course, many times." "Is it safe?" "Mm-hmm. I know my way around, don't you worry." Simon gestured to the right as if to ask, "Is it safe to go this way?" which Stella hesitantly nodded to. He sighed in relief and diverted his stride to the right, walking into the foliage. Stella grabbed tightly onto his hand, careful not to catch her dress on anything sharp. Simon looked behind him and realized Stella was having some trouble, so he lifted her up from under her arms and swung her around to be beside him. Stella chuckled a bit and continued to hold his hand, walking into the brush. Simon was walking a little bit ahead, glancing behind him a couple times to look at Stella. She smiled back at him. Regardless, Simon was still excited about proposing to her. So excited, in fact, Simon didn't even realize what he was about to walk into. He felt a twinge of fear before suddenly losing his footing, slipping off into a short cliff. "Simon?" Stella screamed out for him. She clasped her hands over her mouth in shock. The unmistakable sound of glass shattering rang in Simon's ears, the picnic basket completely smashed. It all happened as quick as lightning, too quick to notice the jagged rocks at the bottom of the pit. Simon screamed colorful words as he shook in pain. A piece of rock was nestled right through his thigh. He winced as blood oozed down his leg. Simon fought back, stifled tears as his hands trembled. He slipped his fingers through a newfound rip in his pant leg, brushing over a deep gash caused by falling into the rocks. The height itself wasn't even that bad, maybe only 5 feet down, but the sharpened spikes at the bottom definitely made it worse. Simon couldn't hold back from crying any longer. Wetness dripped down his cheeks and onto his jacket, which was now ruined too. "Simon?" Idiot, he mumbled to himself, hands covering his tear-stricken face. Oh, he was broken by the fact that his dear Stella had to witness all this. A pathetic display of a man that was too oblivious to watch where he was going. "Stella?" he stuttered out, his voice completely broken. "Please, I can't help." Stella wordlessly nodded her head and ran off towards the direction of the trail. Simon was left stuck in the ditch, battling uneven breath. He had never gotten a laceration this bad before. Of course, accidents had happened back on the days working on his father's ship, but they were never this horrible or painful. Instinctively, he wrapped his hands around his trickling wound. The blood percolated through his pant leg easily, staining everything in sight. He then noticed a new line in his vision that wasn't previously there. Oh, his glasses were cracked. Simon sighed as he took them off, inspecting them. He was upset at the newfound branch protruding through his vision, but decided to keep them on. He was rather blind without them. Simon suddenly snapped his head up as he realized the engagement ring was still inside the destroyed picnic basket. He tried wiping his hands on his pants, but they were already soaked with blood. He frowned as he reached his hand through the rubble, rummaging through the remains. Simon inhaled sharply as a piece of glass from the shattered champagne bottle sliced open his finger. His lips grew even more downward. Eventually, though, Simon found the small velvet box between all the food, which they surely couldn't eat now. He sighed at the waste. What was even the point of coming here? All that effort, all that work, just gone? Simon clicked open the box, making sure the engagement ring was still inside. It was out of place, having been jostled out of the holder. Simon wearily sighed and gently picked up the ring with his shaky hands and slipped it between the folds. He then cursed himself as a smudge of red appeared on the diamond. Of course! How could he be so stupid to touch it when he was in this condition? He wished he had a time machine. It certainly wasn't the first time he thought about that. Definitely not the last, either. The thought of it made Simon long for something like that. An undo button. Something that could fix everything. But then again, what are humans if not big balls of mistakes? Would Simon just go back and fix this? Would he fix his reaction to being frightened at the shadows in the woods? Maybe he would go back to the beginning and fix his relationship with his father, therefore never meeting Stella in the first place. The thought alone made him shiver. Stella. Where is she? He thought. She ought to come back now, right? Simon looked down, feeling his leg once more after tucking the small box away in his coat pocket. As a test, he bent his knee and wiggled around his leg. He flinched and twisted his face in pain, but at least the damage didn't affect him that deep. He was grateful for the fact that none of his bones broke, as they easily could. The whole situation was incredibly unlucky, but at least no arteries were severed. This far out into the forest, Simon could have easily died from bleeding out. He had the urge to rip the sharp piece of agony out of his thigh, but he remembered that it would only make him bleed faster. Simon took a few deep, stifled breaths as he tried to test how much weight he could put on it. He used his arms to lift himself up, and very, very slowly put more pressure on the leg. He eventually got to a leaning position, not without some struggling. Simon trembled and shook in place. He felt almost lightheaded just trying to keep himself upright. Simon squinched his eyes shut, trying to block out the sheer pain he was bearing. And then, something else pricked up his senses. A feeling of deep, dark dread turned over in his stomach, the same feeling he had felt earlier. He looked up over the cliff to see if Stella had returned, but she's still not back yet? A sudden spike of anxiety tingled through Simon's body. He held the sides of his head, trying to get a grip on his nerves, but he just couldn't let go this time. Simon involuntarily gasped as the emotions seeped further through him. He turned around, stumbling. Simon gripped the edge of the cliff, trying to lift himself up. It was a foolishly impulsive thing to do, as any movement could further exacerbate his wound. Stella? A scream suddenly rang out into the thicket. Stella? It rang. It echoed. It stung. Stella! His voice strained in desperation as he scrambled his way up. It was so quiet, so unbearably quiet, all except for the pathetic sounds of Simon trying to get out of the ditch. His thigh bled. ripping and tearing with his erratic movements. Simon managed to push himself up over the edge with his sheer tenacity. Despite the strife, despite the humility, Simon was sure it was love being camouflaged deep down. He would do anything for her, even if it meant losing a part of himself. Simon dug his nails into the dirt. He felt like a corpse clawing its way out of a grave on a moonlit night. He tried to stand up, but immediately fell forward, making the musty earth cram into his gash. Simon cried out again, whimpering, as he forced his body to walk. His breath faltered as his tears flowed down his throat. He coughed and gagged at the mucus forming. Simon stumbled into a mostly upright position, slowly limping his way forward. He used the trees to propel himself further, inching his way towards Stella at an agonizing pace. And finally, he saw her. Stella? She wasn't moving. Stella? Simon's knees crashed down to the ground. His arms fell forward into the dirt. He used every last bit of his strength to crawl his way to Stella, who was facing away from him. Stella, please. He stroked her hair. Nothing. Stella. He shook her arm. Nothing. Simon reached across Stella's chest, gently turning her over. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over her lacerated throat. Simon's heart seemed to shake as he couldn't comprehend what was happening. His most beloved person in his life. Gone. Gone. Stella. He sputtered over and over as his tears choked him. Simon put his hands over Stella's neck in denial, coating his hands in her blood. It seemed to never stop flowing, covering and seething and staining every surface it touched. Please. His tears dripped onto Stella's lifeless cheek. No, 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 no. Simon whined and whimpered, cradling Stella's body. She looked absolutely... what was the word? Haggard. Yes, that was it. Her perfectly styled and plumped curls shriveled into disarray. Her once white dress stained and torn. Her beautiful face drained of her ethereal light. Simon clutched the fabric on her chest. He dipped his head down into the crook of her neck, crying. No, not crying. Simon wept. He bellowed and wailed out into the world. It was the loudest his usually quiet and simple voice could handle. Simon squeezed his love's corpse as hard as he could, embracing her like he never did before. Stella, I'm so sorry, he spoke in his mind. Stella, please come back. I did not mean to leave you. For a moment, Simon glanced down and saw soulless eyes stare back at him. He squinched his eyes shut in fear before opening them again and seeing that Stella's eyes were actually closed, just as they had been. Stella, talk to me, dear. Please, you don't have to act like this. Simon's thoughts began to unravel. Sweetheart, I was going to ask you a very important question. You have to wake up. He began to rock back and forth with her in his arms. It's such a beautiful day for a picnic, isn't it? You make me feel so warm, dear. Won't you smile for me? Why aren't you smiling? What happened to your flower? Please, just hold my hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers. That's better, isn't it? I apologize for tripping earlier. I really didn't mean to ruin our date. It's all my fault. I bought you the sparkliest diamond I could find, Stella. I hope you like it. Please, wake up. Oh, Stella, won't you marry me, you beautiful woman? Why? You're the light of my life, don't you know? Why did I ever leave my papa? You make me so happy, Stella. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. And suddenly, a light shone on Simon's face, reflecting in his watery eyes. The sound of a soft gasp filled his eardrums. Simon wearily tilted his head up, eyes glossed over. He couldn't see what it was. He couldn't bother to see. But figures started to surround him, closing him in. Get away from me, he almost just whimpered it out. The shadows murmured around him, judging. What have you done? What have you done? What have you done? I haven't done anything. What have you done? I haven't. And suddenly his arms were grabbed, and he was jolted upwards. His legs were slack, not having any more reason to stand. Please, I didn't do it, his voice cracked. But the shadows and creatures of the forest didn't care what he had to say. Simon's arms were yanked behind him, snapping into something metal. He didn't know what was going on. He couldn't comprehend it. All he knew was that once was is now gone. The fleeting happiness, now a desolate whimper. There was no catalyst for it, no reason, and yet it still happened. But despite there being no reason, he blamed himself. Despite it all, he still loved her. Despite death now making them part.